I was carrying a dish of scalloped potatoes, still hot from the oven, wrapped in a tea towel because I hadn't had time to find a proper trivet, when Jolene grabbed my arm. She didn't tap me on the shoulder. She grabbed, fingers wrapping hard around my forearm the way you'd stop someone from walking out a door, and she pulled me around to face her in front of 14 people sitting at my parents' Christmas dinner table. "You always do this," she said. Her voice was low and tight and shaking in the way it got right before it stopped being low. "You always make everything about you." I hadn't said anything. I had asked her, very quietly, to push her chair in so I could get past with the dish. "Jolene," I said, "I've got a hot pan." "Of course you do." Her voice climbed. "Of course it's heavy, and of course we're all supposed to stop and notice. That's what you do, isn't it?" My mother set down her wine glass. "Eloise," she said, not to Jolene, to me, "let's not make a scene." I looked at my father. He had already pushed back his chair. He walked to the front hallway without a word and came back holding my coat. He didn't offer it to me. He just held it by the collar and stood by the stairs, like he was waiting for a guest to leave. I pried Jolene's hand off my arm, finger by finger, slowly enough that everyone at the table could see exactly what I was doing. "Don't," I said, that was all. I set the potatoes down on the sideboard. I picked up my keys from the hook by the door. I looked at the tin of butter tarts I'd been up since 5 in the morning to make. 36 of them, 3 trays, my grandmother Solange's recipe that I'd been baking since I was 9 years old, and I left them there. My father closed the door behind me before I reached the porch steps. They thought I'd be back by New Year's, quieter and smaller, with some version of sorry ready to hand over. They didn't know that 3 weeks before that Christmas dinner, I had already made a decision. I'd made it sitting at my kitchen table with a bank statement on one side and a photo of Jolene at Mont Tremblant on the other, and once I made it, I didn't unmake it. The first letter arrived on January 3rd. My mother called me before she'd finished reading it. To understand what happened in January, you have to understand what the last 4 years had been. I'm 31. I run a catering business out of a commercial kitchen I rent in the East End of Burlington, Ontario. It started 8 years ago with a folding table at the Aldershot Farmers Market and a tin of butter tarts made from a recipe card in my grandmother's handwriting. Solange had come from Lac-Saint-Aon, married my grandfather in 1968, and spent the next 40 years feeding anyone who came through her door. She'd pressed the recipe card into my hand the summer I turned 17, and told me in that blunt way she had that I had the best palate in the family, and it was a waste to keep it to myself. I built something real out of that card. It didn't happen fast, and it didn't happen because anyone in my family helped. It happened because I worked until I couldn't feel my feet, and then I worked a little more. By the time Jolene and Craig split up in the spring of 2021, I had 3 corporate clients, a small wedding account, and a waiting list. My mother called me 2 weeks after Jolene moved back to Burlington with Sadie and Bram. She called from the kitchen, the way she did, when she wanted the conversation to feel informal, like it wasn't really a request. "You know Jolene can't manage all this on her own," she said. "You don't have kids. You have the business. You can help in ways the rest of us just can't." I remember the cup of tea she'd already poured me. 2 cups on the table, my mother's way of making the answer feel like something that had already been decided. I said yes. I meant it as yes for a little while. That was not what it became. It started with groceries, then Sadie's figure skating fees, then both kids' enrollment at Millbrook Academy, a small private school near New Street that Craig had originally agreed to cover until he lost his job and then quietly stopped. Jolene told my mother the school was non-negotiable. My mother told me, and somehow between those 2 conversations, it became mine to handle. Millbrook charged $6,700 per year per child. With both Sadie and Bram enrolled, that was $13,400 annually, 2 installments. My credit card in the payer field every time. When the school sent the receipts, they went to Jolene's email. When the payments went through, they came from my account. It didn't stop there. It never stops there. Jolene's car insurance had lapsed twice before I got involved. My mother said it couldn't happen again, not with the kids in the car. The fix for that was my pre-authorized payment to Wawanesa, $215 a month, Jolene's name on the policy, my card behind it. Then the family phone plan. My parents had 5 lines on a Rogers account that had been up for renewal, and my mother said it would be easier if someone just took it over. I was the responsible one. I took it over. $230 a month for 5 lines. My parents, Jolene, and 2 more I'd added for relatives who'd asked nicely once, and then stopped asking at all, because it was just handled. And then the storage unit on Plains Road where Solange's things had been sitting since we'd cleared her apartment in 2022. Furniture, photo albums, her recipe box. Nobody else had offered to keep paying the $140 a month, and letting it go felt like losing her twice. So that one stayed on my card, quietly, because I was the only one who visited it anyway. Added up, close to $2,900 a month. Almost $23,000 a year, 4 years of it. I did the math that November and I didn't cry. I just sat there looking at the number until it stopped meaning anything. The trigger was a Saturday afternoon in early December. Jolene had texted me about a water heater emergency. Vague, urgent, the kind of message that made asking questions feel like cruelty. I sent her $400. 2 days later, she posted a reel from a spa weekend in Tremblant, thermal pools, room service, a caption about needing to fill her own cup. I looked at the photo. I looked at my bank balance. I opened my laptop. One by one, I removed my payment information from every recurring charge. The school installments, the insurance pre-authorization, the phone plan, the storage unit. I set everything to terminate at the end of December. I gave myself 3 weeks, and I told myself that if Christmas felt like being part of a family, if just once I felt like a daughter and not a debit machine, I would turn it all back on and say nothing. I really thought one good dinner might change things. Then Jolene grabbed my arm over a dish of scalloped potatoes, and my mother told me to make a scene, and my father held my coat without meeting my eyes. I drove home with my hands steady on the wheel and I did not cry. The first letter went to Jolene's house. Millbrook Academy, past due notice, dated January 3rd. The January installment had failed to process. Per school policy, the children's enrollment was on hold pending payment. My mother called me at 7:45 in the morning, before I'd had coffee. "What did you do?" she said, not a question. "I stopped paying," I said. The silence on the line was long enough that I could hear the heat clicking on in her kitchen. "You were paying that?" "For 3 years," I said. She didn't ask how much. She didn't ask why I'd never said anything. She didn't ask about the mark on my arm where Jolene's fingers had dug in. "Someone needs to pay it," she said. "Yes," I said, "someone does," and I set the phone down. Ewan came out of the bedroom in his socks and found me standing at the counter with 2 cups of coffee I'd poured on autopilot. He didn't ask me 100 questions. He looked at my face and then at my arm, and his jaw went tight. "I've thought for a long time that this needed to stop," he said. "But I'm not going to tell you how to feel about it. Just tell me when they call again." "They'll call again," I said. He nodded. "They will." I stood there holding the coffee and felt something I hadn't expected. Not relief, not triumph. Just a strange, flat stillness, like setting down a bag you'd been carrying so long you'd stopped noticing it had weight. The Rogers notice came 4 days later. The account holder had requested removal of the authorized payer. All 5 lines would be suspended at the end of the current billing cycle unless each user transferred to their own account. My mother's line, my father's line, Jolene's line. 2 more I'd added and mostly forgotten about. Jolene texted me from a number I didn't recognize. "Turn it back on. No punctuation, no name, the way you'd text an appliance." I didn't answer. My mother left 4 voicemails across a Tuesday afternoon. The first was warm, the one she used when she needed something from me. The second listed consequences in a practical, reasonable voice. The third was cold and honest in a way the others weren't. "We are your family," she said. "You don't just get to stop." Not one of them mentioned Christmas dinner. Not one of them asked whether I was all right. The Wawanesa letter was addressed to Jolene because the policy was in her name. It said her coverage would lapse at the end of the month for non-payment, which meant that unless someone acted, my sister would be driving Sadie and Bram around Burlington in an uninsured car. She didn't call to ask how to sort it out. She posted about it. A long, tearful paragraph about how her own sister was punishing her children, how some people had no concept of family loyalty. The comments filled up with people telling her how strong she was, how sorry they were. She still thought this was about her. She had no idea that I'd simply stopped, and that stopping had been enough to show everyone what I'd been holding up. The storage unit notice nearly broke me. It came to me because that account had always been mine, 60 days past due. I'd let it go on purpose, waiting to see whether anyone else would notice. No one had. The balance with late fees was $498. The contents would go to public auction if not settled by February 15th. Inside that unit were the only things left of Solange. Her armchair, her photo albums, her recipe box with the butter tart card, and 100 others in her careful slanted hand. I got out my calendar and circled February 15th. Not to save the family a problem. To save the one thing that had always been mine. By January, Jolene and my mother had built a story, and they were telling it to everyone. It came through the family group chat, the one I stayed on because leaving felt like conceding something. According to the story, I had cut off Jolene's children out of spite. I had always been difficult. The money had changed me. A cousin I barely knew sent a sad face emoji. An uncle wrote that he'd always thought I seemed a bit standoffish. Nobody asked me anything directly. When you've spent years being the person who absorbs, they write your silence into a confession. Aunt Fabienne was the first crack. My mother's younger sister who lived in Gatineau and came to family things maybe twice a year. She sent me a private message, one line. "That doesn't sound like the Eloise I know, sweetheart, not even a little." Craig called me the following week. Jolene's ex, Sadie and Bram's father. He had a plain, careful way of speaking that I'd always liked. "I've been trying to figure out who was paying Millbrook," he said. "I assumed Jolene was covering it somehow. I pay support every month, but I've seen how she handles money." He paused. "It wasn't her, was it?" "No," I said. A longer pause. "Sadie's been asking about you for weeks. She made something for you. Can I send it?" The envelope from Craig arrived 3 days later. It was the 5th envelope of that winter, and it was the only one that mattered. Inside was a piece of construction paper folded in half. On the front, in Sadie's careful grade 3 printing, "I miss our Saturdays. Please come back, Aunt Ellie." Underneath, Bram had drawn something round and golden with small dots across it and squiggly lines on top. It took me a moment to understand. He had drawn a butter tart. My grandmother's butter tart, from memory because we used to make them together on Saturday mornings, the three of us, flour on every surface. Sadie stirring the filling and Bram eating dried cranberries off the counter and calling it quality control. Jolene had ended those Saturday mornings the previous spring. She'd said the kids came home too sugared up. Said it wasn't fair that they liked my kitchen better than home. I had let her, the way I let her everything. I sat at my kitchen table with that drawing, and I did the one thing I hadn't done through any of the rest of it. I cried. Then I opened Solange's recipe box, which I kept on my kitchen shelf, and I pressed Sadie's card between 2 pages, right next to the butter tart recipe, so the 2 things I would not let anyone take from me could sit side by side. Aunt Fabienne called the next week and told me something that changed the shape of everything. Her daughter Cecile, 16 years old, had been at the Christmas dinner. Cecile had a habit of filming things on her phone the way teenagers do, casually, without thinking twice. She had been filming the centerpiece. She had kept filming when voices at the table went sharp. "Your mother has been telling people you grabbed Jolene first," Fabienne said quietly. That Jolene was defending herself. I set my mug down very carefully. "Cecile has the whole thing," Fabienne said. I'm telling you because you should know. We won't say anything unless you need us to. My mother sent an Easter invitation in late February. Cream cardstock, printed on her good printer, the kind she saved for occasions she wanted to feel significant. A family gathering. To heal and come together. She was setting the table. I decided to let her. But first, on February 14th, I drove to the storage unit on Plains Road and paid the $498 balance at the front desk. The clerk glanced at the screen, cutting it close. Auction was next week. I rolled up the unit door. It smelled like Solange's apartment. Cedar and something sweet and faintly old, her armchair in the corner, boxes of photographs, and on top of one box, exactly where I'd left it, the recipe box in pale green wood with her initials painted on the side. I lifted it. Tucked at the very bottom, underneath all the recipe cards, was an old envelope. Sealed. My name on the front in Solange's looping hand. It had been there the whole time. I didn't open it in the parking lot. I carried it home and set it on the shelf next to Sadie's drawing, and I left it for when I would need it. In the days before Easter, I made 2 phone calls. I called Craig and told him what my mother had been saying about Christmas. He listened. If she lies to that room, he said, I'll say what I know. I've seen the payment records. Just tell me when. I told him I wasn't going there to start anything. I was going once, to say the truth out loud, and then I was done. I called Fabienne and she said Cecile would be there. The video was safe on her phone, and neither of them would say a word unless I needed them to. I almost didn't go. Twice that week, I had my phone in my hand to text my mother that she could keep her dinner. But I kept thinking about Sadie carrying a version of me that Jolene had planted inside her. A version that had decided not to want them anymore. And I thought about all those relatives who'd been handed a story and never once been shown any evidence. I didn't need them to love me. I'd let that go somewhere around the 3rd letter. I just needed the truth to exist in that room out loud one time, so it could stop being something only I carried. Easter morning, I put on a plain gray dress. I picked up the folder I'd spent 3 evenings assembling. Bank statements, school receipts with my name in the payer field, the insurance records, the Rogers account history, a 1-page summary with dates on the left and dollar amounts on the right, clear enough for anyone to read in under a minute. I picked up Solange's recipe box. I carried them both to the car. I wasn't sure why I brought the box. It just felt important to walk into that house with something of mine that no one could edit. There were 18 people at my parents' house in Burlington that Easter. My mother moved through the rooms like she was hosting something historic. The seat at the end of the table, close to the kitchen door, close enough to get up for anything anyone needed. That one was saved for me. My spot. The one I occupied since I was old enough to be useful. Jolene was in the center seat. Sadie pressed herself against me when I walked in and held on for a long moment before Jolene called her back with a look. My mother waited until everyone was seated. Then she stood and smiled the smile she saved for rooms she wanted to manage. We're so glad to be together, she said. I think today is a chance for all of us to move past a difficult few months. Eloise. She looked at me. I hope you're ready to make things right. The room turned toward me. Jolene dabbed at the corner of her eye, perfectly timed. She cut off my kids' school, she said softly, for the table. I didn't want to be the one to say it, but everyone deserves to know what happened. I had made a promise to myself that I would not raise my voice. I kept it. I reached into the folder and I began laying pages on the table, one at a time, the way you'd present evidence to someone who'd already decided not to believe you. Millbrook Academy tuition, 3 years. My name in the payer field, both children, every single payment. Wawanesa Insurance, pre-authorized from my account, Jolene's name on the policy. Rogers Communications, 5-line family plan, my name as the account holder. Plains Road Storage, monthly payments, my card. I set down the last page. I'm not going to explain all of this, I said. I'm just going to ask you to read the names. The folder moved around the table. I watched it the way you watch a tide shift. Fabienne picked up the school receipts first, and read them twice before passing them along. A cousin who had sent me the sad face emoji covered her mouth. The uncle who'd called me standoffish read the insurance records and rubbed the back of his neck. My mother reached for the pages and smoothed the top sheet flat, as if straightening it might make it say something different. Jolene changed tactics the way she always did when the ground moved under her. "She's always been jealous of me," she said, and the warmth was gone from her voice now. "This is what she does. She keeps score. She makes herself the martyr." Craig stood up from the corner of the room. He'd been so quiet that the room had almost forgotten he was there. "I pay child support every month, Jolene," he said in his plain, even voice. "So we both know who was paying Millbrook, and we both know she didn't grab you at Christmas, because it's on video." Fabienne looked at Cécile. Cécile, without any fuss at all, turned her phone around and pressed play. The room heard it before they made sense of what they were seeing. A chair scraping. My voice asking Jolene, quietly, to push her chair in. Jolene's voice, rising, and then, on the screen, clear and unmistakable, Jolene's fingers wrapping around my arm, and me removing them, and the single word I said, "Don't," and then the controlled, deliberate way I set the food down and picked up my keys. Nobody in that room could unhear it. Jolene's face crumpled into tears. Real ones this time, or something close enough. The kind that had always made the whole table rise to comfort her, that had always made the room rearrange itself around her pain. She waited for someone to stand, for someone to turn and look at me the way they always had. Nobody moved. I had never seen the machinery fail before. I watched it happen in real time. She pulled the switch and the lights stayed off. She looked to my mother for rescue, the way she always had. My mother was staring at the pages in her hands. Every face in the room moved slowly to my father. He had been sitting with his hands flat on the table since Cécile pressed play. He sat that way for a long moment, and then he stood up. "I borrowed $8,000 from Eloise in 2022, he said. His voice came out rough and low. "For the roof." She didn't hesitate. "I never paid it back, and I never once thanked her for it properly." He stopped. "I watched this family take from her for 4 years. I told myself it wasn't my business. At Christmas, I held her coat and I opened the door." His voice cracked. "I should have walked out with her." My mother said, "Douglas, sit down." He didn't sit down. The whole room felt the difference. The one person she had always been able to count on to smooth things over, standing in front of everyone, not moving. That was the sound of something changing hands, not a shout. A man refusing to be managed. I looked at my mother then, and I didn't see a villain. I saw a woman who had spent 30 years, believing that if she could hold the story together, she could hold the family together, watching that story walk out of her hands. I closed the folder. "I didn't make everything about me," I said. "I paid for everything. Those aren't the same thing, and every single person in this room knew that something was holding this family up. You just never asked what." I set Solange's recipe box on the table, the pale green wood, her initials on the side, the only thing of hers anyone had let me keep. Then I picked up my keys and I opened the door myself. I was on the front porch steps when I heard small feet behind me. Sadie had run after me. She took my hand at the bottom of the driveway and held on without saying anything, the way she used to on Saturday mornings when the oven was heating up, and she was reading through the recipe beside me. Craig came out a moment later and stood with us in the driveway in the April cold. For the first time in a very long time, leaving that house didn't feel like being cast out. It felt like bringing the right people with me. The weeks after Easter were quieter than I expected. Jolene sorted out her own insurance. She transferred her phone line to her own account. Millbrook sent her the overdue bill and she paid it, which meant she had always been able to. The story about me faded, not because anyone apologized, but because the people who'd been repeating it had sat in that dining room and read the documents and watched the video, and there's no graceful way to keep telling a story once the evidence has sat at the same table as you. My father came to see me in early May. We met at a diner halfway between Burlington and Hamilton. He brought an envelope. Inside was a check for $2,000. First of four, he said, each one a month apart, until the $8,000 was settled. He'd written nothing on the memo line. He didn't ask to be forgiven. He just slid it across the table and looked at me the way he hadn't been able to at Christmas, straight on. I didn't thank him. I just let it be a beginning. Because a beginning was what it was, and I wasn't going to pretend it was more than that. I kept a door open for Sadie and Bram. Through Craig, I started seeing them again on Saturday mornings in my kitchen. Sadie on the step stool cracking eggs, mostly into the bowl. Bram on the counter eating dried cranberries and calling it quality control. 3 generations of a recipe, flour on every surface, the way it was supposed to be. Jolene didn't love it, but she had stopped having the kind of leverage that made her opinions about my kitchen anyone's business but mine. I also set up a small education account in my own name, earmarked for the kids. It doesn't pass through Jolene, it doesn't pass through anyone. When Sadie needs university tuition, when Bram needs something real, it will be there, and it will go directly to them. Loving those children was never the problem. Being used as a route to reach them was. And I wasn't going to hand that over again. In June, I went back for the rest of Solange's things. Her armchair is in my living room now. Her photo albums are on the shelf beside the recipe box. It doesn't look like a storage unit anymore. It looks like she's still here, which is close enough. One quiet evening in early July, I finally opened the envelope with my name on it. It was a note in her handwriting, the same script as the recipe cards, a little shakier, written sometime before she died. She must have tucked it into the bottom of the box, where she knew it would eventually be found by whoever cared enough to keep paying for it. To my Eloise, it said, the one who feeds everyone and still goes home hungry. Don't wait for them to make room for you. Set your own plate. I read it 3 times. I folded it carefully along its original creases and slid it into the front pocket of the recipe box, behind the butter tart card. Then I did exactly what she told me. That week, I added Solange's brown butter tarts to my catering menu for the first time, listed on the small chalkboard beside the serving station at my next event. People asked about the name. I told them she was my grandmother, that she had come from Lac Saint-Jean and fed everyone who came through her door for 40 years, and that the recipe was hers, and the business was because of her, and that putting her name on the menu was the least I could do. The tarts sold out before the main course was cleared. At the end of that event, after the last guest had gone and the kitchen was clean, I cut one for myself and sat down at the prep table in the quiet. Just me, no one to refill for, no one to get up and help. It tasted like her kitchen. Like Saturday mornings before any of it got complicated. Like a seat that had always been there, waiting for me to stop apologizing for taking it. For the first time in 4 years, that was enough.